UEFI Plugfest Taipei 2017. We are pleased to inform you that the Plugfest this year is hosted by AMI. On behalf of AMI, I would like to thank you all for taking time off your busy schedules to join us. Should you have any questions during the event, please feel free to visit our event center at the 7th floor. To begin with today's training, I would like to invite Mark Duran, the president of UEFI Forum, to introduce the state of UEFI. Please join me in welcoming Mark.
All right, now I'm in command. Okay, so I don't usually do this, but I want to stand behind this podium to deliver the talk today because the cameras are on, and at least one of them is very narrow field, so if I wander, I'll be off to the side. Okay, so for those I have not had a chance to meet, my name is Mark Doran. I work for Intel, that's my day job, I'm a fellow there. And I'm the lead architect for all things host firmware, host CPU firmware. So in some respects, people will tell you that Andrew Fish might have invented UEFI, but it's my fault, is usually how that story goes, that we still have it. Okay, there are quite a lot of materials here today. They gave me a ton of foils and 30 minutes to talk, so I'm going to go pretty quick, which will get you to the next talk that Dick's going to give on security things, which will be much more interesting than this, I promise you. We'll talk a bit about the event, the state of the forum itself, how that's set up, a quick flyby on what we've been doing in the work groups on the specifications lately, summarize, and then if there are any questions, we'll get those out of the way too. So we'll keep going here, event overview. So I feel like the sportsman at the end of the event here, I've got to thank the sponsors first and foremost. These kinds of events really can't happen without the help and support of various member companies that have pitched in. I want to say a special thank you in this case to AMI, who are our primary hosts this week, but you'll see the other companies here have also chipped in to make various parts of the event go well. So I want to thank all of those companies, and hopefully you will too express appreciation for the help and support. Can't have this kind of event without that extra help. Okay, so here is my eye chart for the day. I think everybody has a copy of this that was handed to you with the registration materials, but just as a reminder, we're at the beginning of the agenda right here, and there are talks later on through the next 3 days, and then we'll pack up again on Friday and head on home. Quick logistical efforts here. If you are here, you've done all of the check-in kinds of things, but it will be interesting to know that lunch is where breakfast is, so that's on the 15th floor here. For those of you who haven't found it yet, all of the testing activities are going on the 7th floor. And if you need to get into one of those suites, if you haven't yet, all the keys and access cards for those kinds of things are down at the reception on the ground floor. Just keep dismissing that pop-up. It's a good job it doesn't come up on the main screen. Okay, we have put together a survey as well, a plea for feedback here. These events are primarily for your benefit, of course. Get everybody in the same space for a little while, education, some testing opportunity, and a chance to network as well. We want to make sure that these are as useful, interesting, and productive for you as possible. And in terms of planning future events, the more you tell us about what went well, what didn't go well for this event, the better job we can do with that in future. So I know everybody gets a ton of surveys, and they're all very annoying, but in this case, if I could make a special plea for a little bit of input there, we can make the next one of these events even better for you than this one. Okay, the forum. Let me show you the grand org chart for how the forum is put together. The membership is divided up into these layers here. 13 promoters. We've added one since the last time that we ran this kind of a foil at a Plugfest. That would be ARM has joined the board recently. There's a couple of folks from that organization here, which is great to see. We're up to 42 contributor members, 4 new ones since the last Plugfest in October. The contributor members are the primary source of folks that help contribute towards the specification, help review that, get the specification work ready to go out. We're up to 245 adopters, so that number is increasing at quite a good clip. 29 adds since since the last time we did this in October, and up to 37 individual adopters. This is a kind of an unusual thing. Not all standards organizations do this, but I kind of like the fact that we allow individuals to join without a corporate affiliation, particularly for the open source community. That gives folks an opportunity to get access to all of the specs and licensing rights and privileges that go with that without necessarily being associated with a corporation. I think philosophically the forum tries to go for, well, I've always tried to aim us towards the lowest possible barrier to adoption for the specs and the technology that's associated. So things like being able to make it easy for the open source community to participate even on an individual basis is very important to me, and I'm glad that we were able to fold that into the Constitution. The board of directors is made up of one rep from each of the promoter companies, and that board charters the individual work groups. It's the next row down on the chart here. We have a communications work group. Those folks are largely responsible for putting the plans together for this event. So again, thanks to the sponsors, but thanks also to the ICWG for their work on putting the podcast together. The main UEFI spec work group has a number of different sub-teams that meet on individual topic areas and provide consensus proposals in their subject matter expertise area for the main work group to look at. It shows that the platform initialization work group and the UEFI work group have separate security sub-teams. In practice, that's more or less one team, because it's the same people that meet in both venues there, and that team really keeps us honest in terms of the infrastructure that we're putting into the specification for security purposes. There's also a test work group. We have the ACPI work group that's more recently added to the mix. And that has a sub-team that deals with non-volatile. It says NVDIM up there, but they're essentially working on a number of different facets of how non-volatile memory technology will enter the specification realm. And on the end there, we have the security response team. Not really a work group so much as a clearinghouse for information about all things security related, and Dick will touch on that more significantly when we get to the next talk. If I can get through this one nice and quickly for you. Okay. So just a quick flyby on some of the history. Again, some of you more or less familiar with this. The forum was founded in sort of 2005 kind of time frame. We had an original specification that Intel contributed, the EFI specification. That became the UEFI specification, and we put it into this industry organization to be the home for it. And in the interest of time, I'm not necessarily going to read all of the milestones off here. You can read those faster than I can actually read them out. But I do want to point out again, support for bringing the open source community in. That was really the one piece of the community as it was originally conceived that was not well represented. So as arguably one of the two major significant operating system communities that we have to service in terms of platform support, I'm really proud of the fact that we were able to get the Linux Foundation and open source participation in general to be first-class citizens, a seat at the table to help us progress the specification work. We picked up the ACPI specification in 2013, and that's another theme-driven acquisition for us there, trying to reduce barriers to adoption. There was a SIG organization that owned work on that specification before, 4 or 5, depending on how you count it, member companies around that table, but rather a closed venue for specification creation. By bringing it into the UEFI forum, we've allowed that entire ecosystem of 300 or so companies to get much better access to the process and influence on the actual content there. And again, as a result, we're starting to see the ACPI specification get used on a wider range of platforms and be much more flexible across platform design envelopes and also machine architectures as well. Okay, so scroll forward to today. I think we're in a pretty good position if you compare what we do to other specification development organizations. I'm extremely proud of the culture that we put together around the specification work we do. To my way of thinking, I've had exposure to a number of different standards organizations. This one is one of the most collaborative and productive organizations that have been around. The general tone in the work groups is leaning towards creating a better specification as we go forward. In some other organizations, the tone is to slow things down, or disagreement is rife. We don't really have too much of that, and to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what the formula is, but good job everybody, keep it going, because that certainly makes it more productive and certainly more fun to be around. So 337 member companies, and I largely feel that we're all pulling in the same direction, which clearly makes us more effective. The future, people keep telling me, hey, you've got a 2,000 plus page specification for UEFI, and I think we're up to about 1,700 pages for ACPI now. These things are big enough as they are. How could you possibly add more things? And of course, a couple of different answers to that. Our friends on the hardware side of the house are not done innovating. They keep bringing us new things that we have to initialize in the platform. That requires us to add infrastructure, interfaces to be able to go do that. I think the other one that we're going to hear a lot about this week, and hopefully I really want to have you take on board, the security research team outside of the security threat research community has turned its attention to firmware much more significantly in the last couple of years. We saw all the trials and travails that Microsoft and others in the operating system world had as the security mafia went through and tried to find exploits in that code, and there were many. And it took them quite a while to nail things down. But the operating system guys are doing a really good job with that now, to the point it's a much harder target to attack the OSs. And that, of course, has the research community, the malware community alongside it, looking for a softer target. And good news, bad news, we've demystified a lot of what's going on in the pre-OS space by publishing these specifications and a good deal of open source reference code. But to some degree, that makes it easier for those interested in security to take a look at what we're doing and potentially find exploits. So we're seeing an increasing rate of publications and exploits showing up in our ecosystem, and I think it's incumbent on us as a result to be as defensive as we reasonably can. Right? There's no way to quash all possible security threats or avenues for attack, but certainly we can pay attention as best we can and close as many avenues down as possible, make ourselves as hard a target as possible for those malware writers, and hopefully as a result convince them to go somewhere else, right, with an easier attack profile. Okay, so a little bit about resources here. We've added a section on the primary website. It's under the events menu item, I think. It's a section entitled Industry Resources, and we're starting to populate that with features, various presentations and articles and things of interest and relevance to our community. So hopefully that'll be a growing resource over time. I have a feeling that the videos that they'll take this week will start to show up there, at least in linked form, for example. And the other thing I want to encourage you to recognize is that we have a page, uefi.org/security there, where you have a venue to report concerns or ask questions about security-related matters through the website as well. I'm sure Dick will mention that again. We're trying to make sure that everybody takes that message away. We're very much interested in gathering as much information as we can about potential threats and sharing that information across our ecosystem community, and hopefully giving us all a chance to defend against the possibility of serious malware making it into the wide world of sports beyond our borders. Okay, specification update. This is the first year, 2017, where we've actually published 3 specifications essentially synchronized in one go. So we have new versions of the UEFI spec, the PI specification, and the ACPI specification. And you'll notice that the UEFI spec and the ACPI one already have the A suffix. So in fact, since we published those in the first half of the year, we've actually already issued an errata update for those. The The primary theme there that drove the timeline for those, again, relates to, as I mentioned before, the addition of technology support for non-volatile storage memory kinds of constructs, although there are a number of other interesting additions as well. I've got a set of foils here that breaks down kind of the highlights of each of the ads for each of the specifications. And again, in the interest of time and not to bore everybody to death with the minutiae of what we've been busy with in the work group, consider this a list that you can read off. There are a number of interesting articles there that relate to security for the UEFI spec, and there is a little bit of work for the non-volatile memory support as well in the shape of some memory map changes that we did. So you can read those there. I think everybody gets a copy of these foils too, so you'll be able to go back and take this as a cheat sheet. You can always look at the change history in the front of the specification. That tells you literally, item by item, what changed and where in the book, but this is kind of a summary of the big ticket items. In the ACPI spec, other things unrelated to the non-volatile storage, which sort of comes in this heterogeneous memory thing. We've added some support for properties for secure devices, some debug additions, and a little bit of, this is more related, I think, to the ARM community, a little bit of information to help you divine the topology of how processors are laid out on boards, which is not discernible without a little bit of a clue from the board design. It's not software discoverable. So that's the ACPI spec. The PI spec, again, similar kinds of things. We continue our architecture support expansion, so there's RISC-V binding information that we've put in and some support for that down in the PEI space. Probably the big one that doesn't relate to any of the things I've said so far that's additional in the PI spec is this idea of adding SPI bus stores. Long the home of the NOR flash in IA platforms anyway, with the advent of more SoC formulation designs, we're starting to see I/O IP blocks in more quantity show up connected via SPI, serial interface of various sorts of GPS and other kinds of sensors, for example. And it turns out having generalized infrastructure for managing those kinds of IPs that are connected via SPI is pretty useful. So every time I change foil, I get this pop-up with the, anyway. A little bit distracting, but for me, not for you, hopefully. The other thing I want to talk about is SCT updates. Did the microphone time? Thanks, Tim. All right. How's that? Okay, much better. Even I can tell you. I noticed. Thanks for the heads up. SCT updates. So the SCT 2.6a that matches that version of the specification is actually going through formal review right now. In fact, one of the things that we have to do this week, Dom and I have to sit down and figure out exactly when the board meeting will be for doing the approval on that. It might well have been this week, but for the fact that several of us are here. So, that is very nearly pending. I don't believe we've had any significant comments against the tests as yet, so with luck that will get approved with just the ceremonial board acquiescence at the end there. You can get a copy of that. There's a link for that there, but I believe there are people running around with copies of that set of materials on USB keys this week that we should be able to use. Is that right, Eric? I think we have some versions of that here, right? The 2.6 materials. If not, we can probably run them. The other thing I want to say about SCTs is that we're looking at a potential change in the development model. We've done that as sort of a closed community effort within the UEFI confidential veil, and I think there's a proposal maybe to change that a little bit and make the code and the development of it more of a open process. If that is a topic that is of interest to you, I'd ask you to talk to the chair of our testing work group, which is Don Way. He's for you right down front in the second row. Thanks for the wave. Input gratefully accepted on that topic. that will be an element of discussion that the board will be looking at hopefully within a couple of weeks from now. There's also an update to the test that we use for ACPI testing that we get major help from Canonical with there, the FWTS. So that's the magic latest release number 17900. And again, links to find that. Hopefully you'll be able to follow those links directly from the presentation materials when you get access to those. Okay, so for what are we working on looking forward, there is the non-volatile sub-team is continuing to work on a number of things that they want to extend in that space. So I'm certainly expecting more work from them. The support for the architectures that we've added more recently continues to expand, and we'll incorporate updates as needed by the industry. What that means is when the hardware guys come up with some new thing that we need to add support for, we'll sit down and write some interfaces. But to be honest, right now, as far as the specifications is concerned, we're sort of in a holding pattern. I'm not really looking to extend the specifications. And that's really a function of trying to give the implementation side of the house a chance to catch up with the state of the art. A number of you or a number of your companies around the room have come to me and said, hey, we're struggling to keep up with the rate of publications and specifications. And we've done this once before in the history of the forum, has taken a pause where we haven't published updates to the specification for 18 months or so. And that gives a bit of a holiday from spec work for the folks that are working hard on that, and also gives a chance for the implementation side to catch up. So that's kind of where we are. I don't have any pacing items as yet for any of the specifications. Pacing items are topics that we expect to put into the specification where the work group decides, okay, when this topic is fully fleshed out and we actually have good draft material to put into the specification, that's the point at which we would then publish the next version, and anything else that we've been working on in the meanwhile goes along for the ride with that element. And that usually sets a timeline for when we expect the next specification to come. So right now I don't have any pacing items, so what you can take away from that is that there really are no timelines for the 2.8 version of the UEFI spec. We'll come up with one, I'm sure, at some point, but right now there's nothing particularly driving that day. Okay, so let me circle back and summarize a little bit. The specification work taken collectively provides a set of interfaces that give you access to abstract mechanisms that allow us to support new technologies. The fact that it's extensible, written right into the name of the specification, is something that we'll continue to trade on, and that will give us a road to future work for new devices and capabilities in the platform as they come along. We're increasing the degree of focus on security over time. If we say this 50 times this week, it probably won't be enough. I can't emphasize to you enough how important of a topic the business of staying secure and maintaining systems out in the field once they ship, and ensuring that we don't end up with a collective black eye and systems bricked out in the field is a responsibility that we all share. It's a complex interoperability story that the specification set that we have charge of will tell you, and many moving parts in that, and ensuring that we maintain the root of trust all the way from the hardware through to the operating system, providing a secure and stable and reliable, trustworthy base for applications to run in those operating systems that boot through UEFI. Is something that we all contribute to in the work that we do. Hopefully by writing all of the interfaces and the structures that go with them down in specifications, that helps us all be more efficient about development work. And certainly if you conform to the specification, 337 member companies working around the table there, that's a pretty good sized market that you have access to if you build a product that is conformant. So hopefully it doesn't need saying in this room, but obviously conformance is a good force multiplier in the market for your company. Okay, looking further ahead, I believe we have a date now identified for the Spring Floodfest, which will be in March of next year, 26th through the 30th, and that'll be in the Seattle area. So I'm sure we'll mail out multiple reminders about this close to the time, but for those of you that haven't heard already, look for the back end of March as the next Plugfest event time. Okay, so I've left about 3 or 4 minutes at the end here. Anybody have questions that I can answer? Aside from this copy of Windows 7 that seems insistent on asking me questions every 2 seconds. All right, well, I'm going to be here certainly through the rest of the day. I'll be around for the event this evening as well. So if questions occur to you that I can help with through the course of the day, please come find me. I'm happy to say hello and meet faces that I haven't met before. That'd be great too. And just don't be shy. Bring a question if you've got one. Okay, so thanks for coming, and I hope everybody has productive time in the test suites downstairs with the different interoperability testing that you can do, and enjoy the event tonight. If I don't get to talk to you before then, it should be fun by the sound of it. Music and beer, how bad can it be, right? It's usually a pretty good combination. And that's the end of this section, so I will get out of the way and let Dick take over. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Dick Wilkins from Phoenix Technologies, but I'm really here kind of wearing my board of directors hat as Phoenix's rep on the board, talking about the UEFI security response team. I just want to fill everybody in on what's going on with that and give you the latest and greatest. And to say, probably half of this presentation is something I've given before, so some of you have probably seen it, but there'll be some updates in the middle that will be of specific interest, even for folks who have seen it before. No. I'm having the same problem that Mark was having. Okay, this is what we're going to talk about. What is it? How did it come about? Who's members? What does it do? How the input's processed, and a call to action, of course, at the end. What is the USRT? The UEFI Security Response Team is a subcommittee of the Board of Directors. It's not a traditional specification working group. We don't follow those same rules. Membership is controlled in that it's the promoter companies plus any specific invitees. Its primary purpose is to provide a point of contact for security researchers and anybody else who wants to support, report any issues or vulnerabilities to the membership of the UEFI. This has been a long-standing problem. As probably you all know better than anyone, the supply chain for firmware on platforms is incredibly complex. It's with all the OEMs and ODMs and IBVs, or I call them IFVs now, because independent firmware vendors, not BIOS vendors, but BIOS is a term that we need to get away from. Anyway, with all of those miscellaneous companies, and even a single OEM can have multiple platforms with sources from multiple code bases. So you never really know who to talk to when you find a machine that's got a problem with it. So we wanted to provide a single point of contact where everybody could reach out and get a hold of the right person, even if they weren't sure who that person was. And the organization will work with the UEFI members to coordinate the responses and to actual or perceived vulnerabilities. Where do we come from? Why are we here? Well, UEFI firmware is ubiquitous in the PC industry and gradually expanding into other places. So firmware is everywhere. And as Mark mentioned, with OSs and applications becoming more and more secure, the bad guys and the security research community is looking for other places to attack, and firmware is an obvious place. If you can take control of the hardware before the OS is even loaded, you're out of luck, basically, as a user. So the white hat folks, the security researchers, the good guys that are trying to help us out, really. And they want to tell the right people about a problem before they announce it to the world. But they will announce it to the world. They want credit for their work. That's how they get their funding and their kudos and all that, is by going to Black Hat conferences and making presentations. So they want to go public with stuff, where obviously we'd much prefer that they just tell us and then keep it quiet. That's not going to happen. So they need somebody to tell. They don't understand the supply chain, so they don't know how to tell the right person. They're very technically savvy, but they don't know much about the business. And of course, the black hatters out there in the world, they're just trying to attack us, and we hear about those from various sources. So we just want to provide a way to let this community know about security vulnerabilities. So we formed the USRT, and one of these, actually, we had a discussion about, gee, we need to solve this problem, and the board of directors met and decided to kick this off and give it a try and see if it would work. And it seems to have worked reasonably well. And obviously there was a need. These are the actual members, the people who are currently participating in the USRT. Again, it's typically the promoter companies, but not all have chosen to participate at this point. The ones highlighted in red are the ones who are actually handling, who have volunteered and provided resources to handle incoming security vulnerability reports. They're the people who have joined our rotation list of designated responsible individuals to receive and process incoming reports. The other members that are in gray here are active participants, and they attend our meetings and help guide us along the way, but for one reason or another haven't had the right person at the right place at the right time to participate in the rotation. So we've created a web presence, Mark mentioned that already, where you can find out how to report. We provide a PGP email key, so we can receive encrypted reports from security researchers who don't want to send on the open internet technical details of problems they may have found. We've reached out to the various CERT groups, the computer emergency response teams, to let them know we exist and they can get a hold of us if they need to and how to reach us. We've joined the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams first. And they're a group of 150 computer emergency response teams from major corporations and national governments around the world. And they get together and talk about best practices and how to handle security incident responses and those kinds of things. So they're very helpful, and also they get us the visibility that as a member, that people know that the UEFI forum is available and is participating as a computer emergency response team. And of course, we've formed a relationship with the Tianocore folks about the open source firmware that we all use. Okay, so we've handled about 40 actual incidents or reports or whatever you want to call them to date in the past 3 years that we've been in existence. A handful were just informative. Typically in a situation, these are bloggers that have found something on the internet or seen something at a conference that may not be too widely known yet, and they want to give us a heads up that, hey, I'm about to talk about this in my blog, and you may want to know that we're going to do that because it's going to give a much wider visibility. That's useful, and we try to disseminate that information as far as we can, and we don't want to discourage people from doing that because it can be helpful. On the other hand, it's not a new issue, not a new problem. A couple were turned to be focused. I refer to these as the aluminum foil hat brigade, who contact us and say some bizarre thing is happening with my computer, and I think that the firmware is being attacked or something like that, and the technical details tell us it's space aliens that are attacking the firmware or something. It's they're fun to read, but they're typically not something that we want to do some great notification about. And the rest were real bugs, real problems with real firmware implementations in the field that needed to be dealt with in one manner or another. And I tried to remove, as we get duplicates, of course, as I tried to remove them from this count. So we're probably talking, about 30 real bugs that needed to be fixed in the code. That's not insignificant for about 10 a year on average. So that's something we all should care about. Okay, I want people to know what we do with things. A lot of people are worried about, oh gee, if I report this, how is it going to be handled? Who gets notified? Is that information secure, et cetera? So briefly, typically reports go to our security at UEFI.org, but we'll take an incident report any way we can get it. But that's typically what happens. And people can use the PGP key to send encrypted information to that address. An administrative person receives that email and creates a Mantis ticket. We use the Mantis system that is used to track specification changes because it's handy, everybody's familiar with it. We increased its security, used to put it on an HTTPS server so that it was relatively safe to read by remote users, et cetera. And we acknowledge the receipt of the information to the reporter, and then an email goes out to the security response team with just the Mantis number that contains the technical details. Then a member of our rotation group reviews the incident, tries to decide best judgment on how it should be handled. For something that's obviously new and of critical interest, we have a process for dealing with that immediately. If there's any uncertainty, we call a meeting, and the USRT meets and discusses it and decides how we want to handle it if there's some question. And the responding person also has the right to just disregard it if it seems to be just a bogus report or whatever. But we always discuss those at our next regularly scheduled meeting. Let's see. Then, most importantly for you folks, if we decide this is a real security issue that the membership needs to be aware of, we will send that information to an email alias that's maintained by the administrators of UEFI.org, and let everybody know that this incident occurred, and here's the Mantis ticket number that is tracking that information. That way, contributor members of UEFI can access that information anytime they need to, and review it and deal with it inside the company. I'd like to say one of the most important things here is many times the reports come in and say, pick a victim, my HP computer does this specific thing, and it comes in on one specific model of computer for one particular OEM. And the question is, of course, do we just notify that OEM, or do we send out the blast email to all of the UEFI members? We tend to bias towards everybody, because it turns out we've observed that if one company has a vulnerability, even if another company has implemented the code themselves and has their own custom written code, engineers tend to make the same mistakes over and over again. So if somebody made the mistake, probably somebody else also made the same kind of mistake. And so a code review by all companies is probably worthwhile. And as it says, every effort is made to protect sensitive information so we don't release it to the public accidentally. We don't want to create a zero-day situation. So, what we will do is attempt to coordinate responsible disclosure of vulnerability details between the UEFI members and the reporters. We can act as a point of contact to help you out if your firmware in your product has a vulnerability. And you say, oh gee, it's going to take us 6 months in order to get that fixed and get it rolled out to our customers. We really would prefer that security researcher not publish it at the next Black Hat until we've had a chance to roll out the fixes. So we will work with the security researcher or whoever reported us the vulnerability to try and help coordinate their rollout of the information along with your rollout of fixes. We can't always be successful in that space, but we'll do our best. We've gotten some pretty good responses from the security researchers, and we've gotten some delay from one conference to the next conference, that kind of thing. That they're going to be at both of them anyway, so they're willing to wait a couple of months or 3 months or something like that, until the next conference or something. Now, one thing I wanted to say up front here is, as it says, we will not attempt to coordinate releases of fixes to the public. We do know that the bad guys monitor your security updates, and when you release a new version of firmware for a platform, they look for differences in the code, and they try and reverse engineer those and say, oh, they just rolled out a fix, it's got a security fix in it, and I can attack that on all the platforms out there in the field that are not yet patched or haven't updated their firmware, which of course is most of them under the current circumstances. And G, 3 other companies use that same firmware. It's in the Tianocore open source stuff, so they're all vulnerable, so we could attack all of them. So the first person who rolls it out kind of gives the guys a 0 day for tens of thousands of PCs out there in the world. We'd love to be able to coordinate that so all those roll out at the same time, but realistically, it's just not possible. And I would not want to be the one who says to a company, you can't roll out the fix that you already have and it's ready to go because this other company is taking a long time. Meanwhile, your customer gets attacked and their machine breaks or some other security issue comes along. We cannot be in that business of preventing somebody from releasing. It's just not going to happen. We're getting towards the end here. We've worked with the Tianocore open source folks because it turns out, of course, most of the platforms out there use this as the base code for all of their implementations. So this code is used heavily in all of our platforms. So the bad guys monitor the Tianocore code base, and when they see a security fix go in, they know they've got a vulnerability out there in the field that they can potentially attack. We want to minimize that as much as we can. So we've negotiated an embargo process with Tianocore. If they just rolled out a brand new piece of code, a brand new feature or whatever, and then they realize, oh, we've had a security bug in that thing that we just rolled out 2 weeks ago, that will go out immediately. Because probably nobody's got that in a shipping product yet, and we want to allow the uptake of those fixes as quickly as possible. On the other hand, when a security vulnerability is found in code that's been in the shipping open source tree for some time, then we want to make sure that there's time for fixes to propagate before that goes public. So what ends up happening is when they find a security flaw, they tell us about it, then they come up with a fix as quickly as possible, and they roll it out to the UEFI membership first. Then we have 6 months from the date they give us the fix until they put it in the open source tree. That gives the membership a chance to fix it, test it, get it out in a firmware update, and update products in the field before it becomes publicly visible. This gives everybody time. I would love to compress that process and make it happen much faster, because as long as security vulnerability in the field exists, that somebody's liable to find it and take advantage of it. But it's just the reality of the world right now that we don't have a good way to update hundreds of thousands of platforms in the field, and with new security code any faster than 6 months, and in most cases it's longer than 6 months. So, here's my call to action. The notifications from USRT only go out to member companies, contributor member companies who have opted in to receive them. You need to send email to admin@uefi.org requesting to be on the USRT notified list, and we'll be happy to add any representatives from your company. I recommend that distribution list remain relatively small. A few people, handful of people to get notified. Because when these go out, they tend to go out in flurries, and they can really cause problems in companies with hundreds of emails going out about a security flaw. So all the member companies, as a side, I didn't put it in the slides here, but you need at least a couple of people in your company to be added to the Mantis project for USRT so they can see the Mantis numbers. If you're not a member of the Mantis project for USRT, your company won't be able to see those Mantis tickets. And that's the only place where this information is kept. So you need to, the admin can do that, I can also do it. And it's also helpful for me to know that who in a company is involved. So your company needs to have a formal written policy and procedure for dealing with security vulnerabilities. They're going to happen. Most of you do, not necessarily all of you. So make sure that you have a process for dealing with these things. And my comment earlier about compressing the time from knowledge of a problem until getting firmware fixes in the field and doing automated updates. Mark and I were just talking about his Surface up here. Microsoft has done a bang-up job on the Surface platforms with updates, and mine updates its firmware probably every 6 months or so. I get a complete firmware update on my Surface. So who does that in the field? Some OEMs have enterprise groups that do that fairly regularly, but the majority don't. And I went to an IEEE event with 300 or 400 people that were interested in security and said, of you, how many of you people in the audience have updated your firmware in the last 2 years? And I got like 3 hands out of 300 or 400 people. So even when you supply the fixes, they're not being taken up by the end users. So we need to get a better system for getting them out quickly, and getting them actually installed in systems. So I encourage everybody to participate in the various security forums and figure out how do we do that. And as companies, once you've dealt with a security issue and you have the fix, all that, consider using the CVE system to report that publicly. It just closes the loop and lets everybody know you care, and here's the information, so it's publicly available for anybody. That's the end of this presentation. I'll open it for questions in just a sec. Just FYI, on more security technical material, I have another presentation this afternoon at 1 p.m. That's Phoenix related, so please come back for that after lunch. Anyway, any questions on the USRT? Oh, come on, someone's got to have a question. I guess my presentation was just so wonderful. It covered absolutely everything. Okay, well, I'll let you all go and get to your testing.
The training sessions of this morning ends here. Thank you all for your participation. We'll be serving lunch at 12 o'clock here at the boardroom, and the next talk begins at 12:30. Hope to see you here again.